Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is For the Man Who Has Everything. Now, For the Man Who Has Everything is a Superman comic written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Dave Gibbons, and this was originally published in 1985 as Superman Annual Issue 11. Now, I have For the Man Who Has Everything in this collection here called DC Universe by Alan Moore, and this is a collection of several comics that Alan Moore wrote for DC. Now, not too long before this, Alan Moore was already changing the game with his run on Swamp Thing, and shortly after this, him and Dave Gibbons would do the graphic novel Watchmen, which really did sort of change the comic book industry at the time, and is considered by many to be the greatest graphic novel ever written. Now, the plot of this story is it's Superman's birthday, so Wonder Woman and Batman and Robin go to the Fortress of Solitude to celebrate with him, but when they get there, they discover this plant-like alien attached to his body, and they discover that he's in some kind of catatonic state. Eventually, they discover that this thing was put on Superman by a villain called Mongul, who calls the creature the Black Mercy, and apparently the Black Mercy gives you whatever your heart desires most. Like, it puts you in some sort of dream state, but the dreams it makes you have are ultra-realistic. So, the story alternates between Wonder Woman fighting Mongul and Batman and Robin trying to figure out how to get the Black Mercy off of Superman, but then it also cuts to what's going on in Superman's dream. And in Superman's dream, you essentially get sort of an alternate reality where what if Krypton never blew up and Kal-El was never sent off to Earth and he never became Superman, so he was able to live a happy life on Krypton. And he has a wife and kids, but as the story goes on, you see that even this fantasy that Superman is having is not perfect. Actually, it's far from it. Now, For the Man Who Has Everything is an excellent story. Even if you're not a Superman fan, I would still recommend this because, so much like Alan Moore's other superhero comics, this reads more like thought-provoking science fiction than your standard superhero fare. Now, what I find most fascinating about this story is where you see Jor-El in this alternate reality, even though it's all taking place in Superman's head. Now, because Krypton never exploded like Jor-El predicted, he's pretty much a laughingstock now, but he's still talking about the end of the world, only now it's more of a philosophical end of the world as opposed to an actual end of the world. And you see that Kryptonian society is changing, and Jor-El does not see these changes as a good thing, and he joins basically this radical group that is clearly meant to look like almost Krypton's version of the KKK. And in this dream, Kal-El sees his father really going off the deep end in terms of his political views. One aspect of this story that I thought was really interesting is one of the changes that you see in Kryptonian society in Superman's dream is there are people who are trying to get the Phantom Zone banned, and I actually do agree with that. I actually think the whole concept of the Phantom Zone is extremely draconian. So I would be on the side of these anti-Phantom Zone protesters that you see in the story, and in the story you see them essentially wanting Jor-El to be labeled as a war criminal for discovering the Phantom Zone. But you also see where these anti-Phantom Zone protesters go too far when they attack Kara, who is Kal-El's cousin, and of course is Supergirl, but of course in this alternate reality, she never became Supergirl. Now, of course, this whole alternate reality that you see is just taking place in Superman's head in the story, but that's also kind of disappointing because that would actually be a really good basis for an elsewhere Elseworld Superman story where what if Krypton never blew up? Now, maybe this is a bit of a reach, but Alan Moore being Alan Moore, this wouldn't surprise me. I saw some parallels between this story and the Nikos Kazantzakis novel, The Last Temptation of Christ, in which Jesus got a glimpse into an alternate reality where he was never the Messiah, but you saw the negative consequences of him leading a normal life. I'm not sure if this comic was inspired by that novel or not, but again, it wouldn't surprise me being that Alan Moore is known for incorporating literary allusions into his comics. And also, throughout the history of the character, writers have always tried to associate Christ-like allegories with Superman. Again, it's an excellent story, and I highly recommend it. Now, this comic was adapted into an episode of Justice League Unlimited, and I think it was also adapted into an episode of Supergirl, obviously with Supergirl instead of Superman. So, that was my review on Alan Moore's For the Man Who Has Everything, and bye.